So along with the spinal cord and the spinal nerves, the brain and the cranial nerves completes the central nervous system. So over here you can see a lateral view looking at the side, and then over here you can see a superior view looking kind of from the top down on the brain. And we use these terms, rostral and caudal, to talk about the orientation in the brain. So rostral is typically going to mean towards the nose, but when we talk about the brain, that can mean towards the forehead or even just higher. And then caudal means tail, so this usually means towards the tail, but in the brain, this can mean towards the spinal cord or lower. So the brain is made up into three major regions. So this first region here is the cerebrum, and this is about 83% of the total volume of your brain. And this is kind of a pair of these two kind of half globes. So you can see that there's a left side and a right side. And these are separated down the center by this longitudinal cerebral fissure. So on the cerebrum, you can see that there are a number of folds and then these grooves in between the folds. So each of the bumps is called a gyri. Gyrus is singular, gyri is plural, and then the grooves between those are called sulci. So sulcus is singular, sulci is plural. So there's a large sulcus in the center here, this longitudinal fissure that separates the left cerebrum hemisphere and the right cerebrum hemisphere. If we look at this view, this is the sagittal cut. So if we cut the brain in half and look in the center, you can see that there's this large C-shaped structure right here. And this is where the left side and the right side of the brain connect. And you can notice that these are different colors. So we actually have white matter and gray matter. And typically the gray matter is going to look a little darker, and then the white matter is going to look a little lighter. And the difference between the white matter and the gray matter is the same as the spinal cord. If it's white, it means it has myelin. And gray means there's no myelin. The second main large section of the brain is the cerebellum. So that's this structure back here. So this would be near your occipital bone in the back of your head. And it only represents about 10% of the brain's volume, but it has about 50% of the neurons. So there's a lot of neural processing that goes on here. And this is going to be separated from the cerebrum by this transverse cerebral fissure. And then the third region of the brain is the brain stem, and the brain stem is going to be made up of basically everything else besides the cerebrum and the cerebellum, and we can see it a little bit better on this cross section. So the brain stem is kind of like a vertical stalk here, and it's going to contain the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. Those three sections here make up the brain stem. So our brains develop from the ectoderm, and this is the outermost embryonic tissue layer, and it also develops into the skin and the outer covering of our body. So as you develop, it forms what's called a neural plate. So if this is the embryo, draw you as like a little embryo, the dorsal is the top, and the neural plate forms along the dorsal midline. And what happens is the neural plate, it kind of zips closed like a zipper, and it creates what's called a neural tube. And that neural tube is developed by about day 26 after fertilization. And so usually that's so early that a woman would not even know she's pregnant by the time the neural tube has developed. This is really, really early in embryological development. And then this neural tube is going to go on to become the central cavity of the spinal cord, as well as the ventricles of the brain. So those are the spaces that are filled with cerebrospinal fluid in the brain. By the 4th week, so about day 28, this neural tube is going to start to dilate or get bigger into these 3 main regions. So 1, 2, 3 subdivisions. We have the forebrain, so this would be the most rostral, the midbrain, and then the hindbrain, and then this part here, yellow, would be the spinal cord. And then so this is the 4th week. By the 5th week, this is going to start to divide again into these 5 subdivisions. So starting from rostral, the most rostral is the Tel Encephalon. So the Tel Encephalon has these 2 enlargements that are going to go on to become the 2 sides of the cerebrum. The diencephalon is right behind that, and that's going to become like the thalamus, the hypothalamus. It looks like the pituitary gland here. The midbrain stays as one segment. This becomes the mesencephalon right here in the middle, and this is going to become same name. This is going to stay the midbrain. So again, this is part of the brain stem. These 2 are going to make up the cerebrum. The pons and the cerebellum both come from the hindbrain. So the hindbrain splits into the metencephalon and the myelencephalon. From the metencephalon, we get the pons and this cerebellum. So we've got the cerebellum here. The pons is part of the brainstem. And then the myelencephalon is this lowest part here, is going to become the medulla oblongata, which is also part of the brainstem. And then after that, we can see the rest is spinal cord. So take a moment and describe these 3 main sections of the brain.